Head over to miniaturemarket.com where they have thousands of board games at discounted prices, and you can sign up for product alerts. Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Back in 1981, a board game called Dark Tower had come out. It was way ahead of its time. It was this huge black tower that made all sorts of sounds. It had different monsters in the windows. I had this as a kid and I loved playing it, and even to this day, people have such nostalgic value tied to this that they will pay hundreds of dollars for the old copy from back in the day. So restoration games, and what they're known for, is taking older games like Fireball Island and recreating them into games that are actually good and fun to play, unlike what we don't remember from our childhood, which was those older games actually weren't very good. They were just cool things to look at and play with. So today, I'm going to take a look at the sequel to Dark Tower. It's called Return to Dark Tower from Restoration Games. I just got back from PAX Unplugged in Philadelphia last night, and just before I left that convention to go to the airport, I had a chance to sit down and play through the game, and so I've taken some video. I was not expecting to be able to sit down and play this when I left, so I just took pictures and video from my phone here. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of what the game's about, and then I'm going to show you what I think about it after a first play. Return to Dark Tower is a cooperative game for 1 to 4 players where each player will have their own specific character that has special abilities and some specific actions for them. And over the course of the game, you'll be able to upgrade your character with different virtues that give you different abilities throughout the game. Now this game has many different scenarios. The one we were playing, one player had to have all 5 of their virtues loaded. And also to go throughout the kingdom, finding 3 specific treasures. Once we have that, we were able to find our way into the Dark Tower. Now different scenarios will have different monsters you'll have to fight, but in our scenario, we were going against the Bane of Omens. And if we got into the Dark Tower, the Bane of Omens would essentially come out and we would have to fight them all together to try to beat them and win the game. Now over the course of the game, certain things can happen to give players corruption. And if you get 3 of those, that's one way to lose the game in this scenario. And corruptions do hinder the player in certain ways. And the other way to lose is if we had to put one of these skulls in the tower and there were none left, we'd also lose that way. Players take turns clockwise. On their turn, each character will have their own special move they can do at the start of their turn, and then you can move, and you have up to 3 actions you can take. Now you'll see here there's different buildings in your kingdom, and you're able to reinforce those buildings. Each of them have a special action. Like if you go to the Citadel, you can spend 5 spirit, which essentially is currency you'll get throughout the game for doing different things, to gain one of those 5 virtues we talked about, which is how one player needs to be able to get into the tower. So a player's doing their special move, they're moving around, they're doing one action, and they're possibly reinforcing a building, and they're doing most of these in any order they want. At the end of your turn, you'll be dropping a skull into the tower. Sometimes it will get held in there, and an event might come out, which is usually a bad thing. Other times it might fall out into someone's kingdom and they have to place this on one of their buildings. Now this is bad because if a building's ever full and it needs to get more, well, you gain corruption, which if you get too many is one way to lose. Plus it makes it harder to reinforce that building and use its ability.
It's for all my friends. Has that been yes?
And if you run out of skulls when you need to put one in, that's one way to lose the game. Now you can cleanse those skulls off those buildings by using one of your actions. It also gives you some spirit, which is what you'll use as currency. Now you can also battle foes that are with you on your spot. And in our scenario, we were fighting shadow wolves and brigands just like the original game. Now the battling is done through an app, and now aesthetically it will look really nice, something like this. But we were using a beta version because it was fully functional, so in order to battle we had to use a sort of a non-final version of the app. And so on the app, you would be fighting a foe, you'd choose the foe, in this case we would choose the shadow wolves. And in this case we were fighting against a level 3, so we would tap any 3 wolves, and it's going to bring up sort of a virtual deck for all 3 of them. So each of them have different bad things that will happen to us, like lose 9 warriors, lose 4 warriors and a spirit. In this case, well, not bad for the last one, no losses. Now me as a relic hunter had an advantage that was against stealth foes, which the shadow wolves are one. Also, I'd gained 2 advantages in the mountains, and I were fighting in the mountains, so I had a total of 3 advantages. And to use each of those advantages, I can tap the little up arrow on them and it will reduce what is going against me. If I'm able to get one down all the way, it'll even give us some good things like treasures and spirits and such, but there is some strategy as to which ones you're choosing to use your advantages against. For example, instead of losing 9 warriors, we only lose 3 now from the top one. And so by the time I was done, I only lost 3 warriors. And each player starts with a certain amount of warriors, and you can gain more by going to the village and reinforcing there. Now the other thing you could do on your turn is a quest. There's different quests that you can go on. There's different side quests that have different things that you have to do. And those side quests actually change up each about 2 rounds in the game. If you haven't completed them, sometimes bad things will happen, but if you can complete them, good things will happen. Now at times, you'll be able to unlock doors, and at one point, a glowing red will come up of one of the doors, and you're able to lift that door and see what's going on in there. Sometimes it's a glyph, like this is a glyph of a quest, which means whoever's kingdom faces this, it's harder for them to do the quest action. Other times you open the door and it will be an empty chute and more skulls will come falling out.
I think that's your top door. Yep, it's just it.
Alright, so slide it out. Let's see if there's anything there. Alright, so that's yours to deal with.
Okay.
And at different times throughout the game, the tower will rotate all 3 levels, and what was coming out of those open doors before might have changed. Maybe you have a glyph now, maybe you had a glyph then, and now you have open skulls flowing through that open door. And on top of that, there's different companions you might get for doing different quests or side quests, and sometimes if you don't do those quests, these companions actually go into the tower and fight against you. That should give you a high-level feel of what you're trying to do, at least in this specific scenario, and how the game works. And keep in mind that everything I showed you here is not final, subject to change. A lot of this was prototype.
They're at the same time.
And for fun, I'll just leave you with this last video of us dumping a bunch of skulls in the tower. All right, well, there was a quick look at how Dark Tower sort of works. So let's talk about my first impressions. Now, I played in a 90-minute session. About 15 minutes of that was rules, and the rest of it we were playing. We didn't make it to the end of the scenario, but we played enough to get a pretty good feeling for at least how this specific scenario worked. And we were able to ask questions directly to the publisher about different thoughts and how things were working and how would they work in the future and how they work in other scenarios and stuff. So let me talk a little bit about what I think after playing just basically one 90-minute session with this. Obviously, what you want to know about is the tower. So the tower presence, just as much, if not more, than it used to be when we were kids. It's going to make you stop and say, what the heck are you playing if this thing's on the table? It looks cool, the noises it makes, the lights it does, the way it works with the app, all that sort of stuff. Definitely very cool. The technology in that thing is just unbelievable. I'll get to more about that in just a moment. The way that the skulls fall through. It almost reminded me a little bit of Fireball Island, where sometimes you drop a skull in and it's going to drop off onto somebody's kingdom. Or maybe not, or maybe it just gets sort of held in the tower to be delivered later. And that aspect kind of reminded me of that Volcar dropping the fireballs in there. And it's a cool thing. It almost takes that way to the next level with all the things it can do with what's in the tower. The tower itself, when the doors open and doors start glowing and you take the door up and maybe it's a glyph that makes something harder for you to do, like you've got to pay, extra spirit, which is that currency, to do a quest or things like that. So it makes actions you do harder, which is cool. Or maybe when you open the door, it opens up chutes that make it more possible for skulls to be shooting out into your kingdom and things like that. Really cool idea on the way that thing worked. When the tower rotates at different times, that part's always like nerve-wracking. Everyone's biting their fingernails because it's rotating, and you're hoping that a ton of skulls don't fall out into your kingdom, and typically it will to somebody, and you're watching that through. But the way that whole thing rotates, and I had a glyph before, and now I have an open chute, and a bunch just fell out. Or, hey, maybe I had a chute before, and a bunch fell out before, but now I have a glyph in front of me. And so it'll change what you can do, what others can do, and since it's a cooperative game, that's sort of important. So the tower itself is pretty amazing. A little bit more on the technology of that a little bit later, but it is quite cool what they've done with this. I like the cooperative aspect. I typically like cooperative games. I like how you can go and cleanse others' buildings and their kingdoms. You don't have to stay in your own kingdom. You're working together to fight, and you're helping each other out and things like that. You can trade potions and things like that. And I typically like co-op games, but there was someone there that said, I typically don't like co-op games, but I do really like this one. And so that says something big for someone like that. I like the special abilities of the characters and all the different virtues that you're sort of powering up with and giving you more and more options as the game goes on. The scenario-based quest and monsters is something that's pretty interesting because we just played one scenario and we were trying to essentially find 3 specific treasures and then have someone get maxed out on the amount of 5 virtues, and they're able to sort of break into the tower, and then the large, the big villain of the game was going to come out. We were all going to have to fight him. We never got quite that far. But I like how the scenario-based things will change how things work, what your goals are, what's going on, the different monsters, the different companions that can come out. It looks like they've put a lot of design space in there to make sure that even with this technology and even with the main mechanisms of the game, they're going to be able to wrap that around all sorts of different things to make the game feel fresh as you play more and more. And I'm really looking forward to doing that when this finally comes out next year. Now this game has that app I showed you. And I know some people don't like apps in games, but in this case, I think it's one of those ones that, yes, it's sort of mandatory, but it's also a way that they can fine-tune the game, make things go faster than they normally would, and it allows them to do certain things. And I talked about the technology of that tower. Not only does it help you sort of fight with battling, and instead of drawing cards, it's randomly doing things. And it can change those things depending on the level of the monster. It can change those things depending on what's going on in the game. And I like that it has more influence as to what's going on around you. Also, sort of the events that come up through the app. I asked them, I said, are these random or what? No, actually, it knows the state of the game. It knows what's been going on. It knows certain things about the skulls in the tower. It knows about the windows in the tower. It knows which ones have been, creatures have been battled and killed and which ones are still out there. So with that, it will intelligently come up with events at certain times that have to do with where you're at. And I think that's a really great use of an app because it's something that sort of cards would never be able to do. So they're using the app in the best way possible to make the game more streamlined, but also give it intelligence and allow the game to sort of cater to where you're at. And I think that's brilliant. The side quest is really cool because you're trying to get that one quest, in the scenario, like I mentioned, 3 treasures and then have someone max out with virtues. But there's these, those side quests that come out where you're trying to do 1 or 2, maybe possible more things in other scenarios that are going to give you some bonuses. And if you don't do some of them, bad things are possibly going to happen. And I like that those side quests only stick around for basically around about 2 rounds of play. Because at the end of the month, those side quests are going to go away and new ones come out. But you don't know exactly when they're going to end, but it's somewhere around 2. And that was something they sort of alluded to. So we asked, is this how often does this happen? I like how it's not exactly, you can't bet exactly when it's going to happen. That's another cool thing that the app helps out with. This game has pretty streamlined mechanisms, but definitely gives you a lot to think about. I mean, you're moving around, you're choosing 1 of 3 actions, and you're possibly reinforcing at one of the buildings, and each of those buildings does a different thing. So your turns are actually quite simple. But there's definitely a lot to do, a lot to talk about with other players, the state of the game, what are we fighting for, what are we going for, side quests, avoiding corruption, trying to get the main quest, all sorts of things. So it is very streamlined though, but there's definitely a lot of depth here. I like that the corruption is, it's that possible loss condition where if someone gets, 3 corruption, which I almost got pretty early in the game because I was getting hammered. But there are also sort of hindrances that sort of stop you from doing certain things, which sort of balances because you are, over the course of the game, getting those virtues that are actually helping you out. I like that you're trying to balance sort of what are we doing with quests versus cleansing those skulls, because if you don't cleanse enough skulls, that could make you lose, or it's going to give players corruption, which might end up getting you, a lost game as well. So it is this sort of balance between cleansing skulls, staying away from corruption, the side quests, but also the big quests and battling and all sorts of different things. Now, if I think back to Fireball Island, when they redid Fireball Island, they kept things somewhat similar, but they really improved the game a ton. I had Fireball Island as a kid. I remembered it being awesome and fun, but of course, when you go back and play it now, you're like, wow, this is terribly random. And they fixed that with all the work that Restoration does, and this is why they're so great, is they made it a great, fun game, but still kept it light, kept it true to what it was, but just made it a lot better. Similar to Stop Thief, which they took back from the 70s and made a lot better. This is, they're careful of calling it a sequel because, I had Dark Tower as a kid. I loved it. But a few years ago, I downloaded like a free app which allowed you to play it, and it had all the sounds and all the images and all that sort of stuff. And I played it, I went, wow, this game, I forgot how incredibly random this game is. It wasn't a very good game. It was just wow, how far advanced it was at that time that just made you so attracted to it. And I realized that a few years ago. But what they did with this was really change the game completely, right? It's no longer competitive, it's cooperative. And sure, the tower's there, but it's doing many different things that it was doing before. So, I mean, it's a completely different game based around the tower, keeping it as cool, pushing the technology probably as far now as Dark Tower did back then. So it's still going to have that, oh my gosh, this is really cool, that it had back then that we felt with, but it's actually matching it with great game mechanisms by people that know what they're doing. And so it's definitely a lot deeper, and it's much better in my opinion. Anything negative I could say is just that, you know, if someone played the old Dark Tower and they haven't played any board games since, you know, they haven't played anything in the last 10 to 15 years, they've played no modern board games, they might sit down to this and be a little overwhelmed at the gameplay experience and all the thought and the things that you have to do. They might think it's got too much going on at first, but again, it's actually very streamlined. I mean, you're doing one of three things in your turn, possibly going to a building and doing something. It is pretty easy from a gamer's perspective, but there's still a lot of depth there. If you ask me about the weight of this game, I'd say probably about the weight of, I'd say, at least the scenario we played, about a pandemic, where it's not so far-fetched that you couldn't get someone who's never played modern board games and bring them in, because it is cooperative, so you can sort of teach them as they go. So it's about that depth, but somebody who's never played anything in the last 10 or 15 years, if they just go to Target and heard about Pandemic and get it, they're probably going to be a little overwhelmed at first. And I think someone might be like that with this, but with the coolness factor, I think they're going to spend the time that they'd like to learn it. But again, if you're bringing new people in, since it's co-op, it won't be that hard, and it's very streamlined. For us gamers, sure, it might seem like there's not too much going on, but there really is. There's a lot of design space, a lot of thinking that goes on, even with these streamlined mechanisms. So I'm really looking forward to getting this. Just like when Fireball Island came out, I backed it at the all-in pledge, and I'm definitely going to be doing it for this one too. I was really impressed with my first play, and I cannot wait to see what else they're doing with all the different scenarios and such. Again, it's co-op, 1 to 4 player, and from speaking to them, it doesn't sound like any of the mechanisms really change too much when you're playing with less players, which is cool. So overall, that's my first impressions of just playing like one 90-minute session, but I'm really dying to get more plays on my belt when this finally comes out next year. The Kickstarter is going to be launching, from what I'm told, as of today, when this video comes out, January 14th. So that's what's going on. So that is Return to Dark Tower from Restoration Games. This has been the Game Boy Geek, breaking down barriers, growing relationships through board games by helping you find the next one you'll love. Did you miss the Game Topper 2.0 Kickstarter? Have no fear, it's not too late to get in on the ultimate gaming accessory. Convert your table into a high-quality gaming table with a fully portable Game Topper system and take advantage of some of the best 3mm premium gaming mats in the industry. New styles, new sizes, and new accessories can be yours. Upgrade every game you play by late backing now at GameToppersLLC.com.